So in the first video, we're going to talk about the first of the 6 subsections featured in this chapter. Namely, the 6 are the state of agricultural sector. The second one, the state of industrial sector. The third one, the state of India's foreign trade. The fourth one, the demographic profile of the country. The fifth one, occupational structure. And the last one, economic and social infrastructure. Okay, so what's important to remember here is that all of these subsections, the 6 of them, are trying to create a picture in your head for you to realize why the Indian economy was so poor in so many different areas. Primarily, it all had to do with how the British controlled India. But really, I think a lot of people are unclear about why the conditions in India still persist today. Why are they so poor? Well, they're so poor because historically they've been poor and they were so far behind where they should have been, it's taken them a long time to catch up. The good news is things are heading in the right direction and the future will be brighter. But why things are so bad today is because of how bad they were at the eve of independence. The discussion in this subsection, the state of agricultural sector, can actually be broken down into 4 subsections. The first being low level of productivity. The second being the high degree of vulnerability. The third being a wedge between owners of the soil and tillers of the soil. And lastly, uneconomic and fragmented land holdings. Now let's take a look at each of these in detail. Firstly, let's start with the low level of productivity. The textbook illustrates the low level of productivity by showing 2 crops, wheat and rice, and giving you the amount of output generated at 1947 and then comparing that to a more recent figure. Depending on which book you have, it may be the 2013 figure or the 2011 figure. But what's important here is we can see the output for wheat and rice both have increased substantially since 1947. The implication here is that the Indian government or the British Raj who was in charge of India at 1947 really was not concerned about helping India increase their wheat or rice production, which are very vital goods for the survival of almost any society. So this is a key takeaway to have in the back of your mind. We're not going to talk about why it was poor right now. We're just going to talk about the fact that it was poor and the levels were low. So please have that clear. The level of wheat production and the level of rice production in 1947 was extremely low, nearly 5 times lower for rice and 15 times lower for wheat. Okay, let's move on. Now that we know that the productivity was low, let's take a look at the next topic, high degree of vulnerability. The agricultural system at 1947 in India was highly dependent on rainfall. Without rainfall, there would be no crops. And there were no systems of irrigation in order for them to protect against this risk. We will talk about why this happened later, but really the important thing to remember here is that irrigation systems did not exist. And if they existed, they were very, very poor and were not able to function as they should. This is one of the things that still plagues much of India today. Thirdly, let's talk about the wedge that existed between the owners of the soil and the tillers of the soil. So again, I'm going to back up a little bit. The tillers are the people who are working on the land, and the owners are the people who actually own the land but very seldomly did the work. Now, you can easily imagine this relationship, right? Any company today has employees. What do they try to do? They try to get employees to work as much as possible for as little as possible so they can take the majority of the profits. In Japan, workers earn a lot of money, and although the standard of living is relatively high, the profits for the firms are astronomical. This is basically what's going on here, but at a much smaller scale. So the workers on the land are just given enough money to survive, and the owners of the land are taking all the excess profits. So the owners are motivated by the profit motive to be able to get as much as they can, and the tillers have no skills and no opportunities and no hopes, and they just want to be able to survive, so they take whatever they can get. So both of them have actually conflicting interests. And the last of the 4 topics, uneconomic and fragmented land holdings, was a really simple thing to think about. So each parcel of land which we use to generate some sort of crops are usually, if we think about agriculture in a big sense, you think about huge fields with thousands and thousands and thousands of rows of corn or wheat or whatever it may be. But in India, each person had small patches here and there. So having small patches here and there is a very ineffective way of being able to farm. And that's why subsistence standards persisted. So none of the lands delivered any sort of surplus. Okay, I think it's worthwhile for us to stop now and take a look at what we've learned. Well, if we go back to the very beginning of this chapter, there was an illustration that indicated the 6 things that we were going to discuss about the state of the Indian economy at the eve of independence. And we've just completed the first of those, the state of the agricultural sector. And what have you learned? Well, you've learned that at 1947, the levels of production in India were very, 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 very low compared to what they are today. And they're probably still low compared to what they should be. Secondly, the state of the agricultural sector was very, very vulnerable. The owners and the people who worked on the land were 2 different groups and they had different interests. And the land holdings were very fragmented. So basically, if we think about this in a very simple way, things were very poorly organized and kind of in chaos. So the takeaway for you is that at the eve of independence, there should be no doubt that the Indian economy was a backward economy.